So continuing on with Life of the Buddha, this is part about the doctrine, Noble Eightfold Path, going through each path factor, and just starting to get our minds around each of these path factors from different angles. And of course, after this, then we get into some of the big stories from later in the life of the Buddha, starting with the story of Devadatta and his splitting of the Sangha. Lord, right view, it is said. What does right view refer to? Usually, Kachayana, this world depends upon the dualism of existence and non-existence. But when one sees the world's origin as it actually is with right understanding, there is for him none of what is called non-existence in the world. And when he sees the world's cessation as it actually is with right understanding, there is for him none of what is called existence in the world. Usually the world is shackled by bias, clinging, and insistence, but one such as this who has right view, instead of allowing bias, instead of clinging, and instead of deciding about myself, with such bias, such clinging, and such mental decision in the guise of underlying tendency to insist, he has no doubt or uncertainty that what arises is only suffering arises, and what ceases is only suffering ceasing. And in this, his knowledge is independent of others. That is what right view refers to. All exists is one extreme. All does not exist is the other extreme. Instead of resorting to either extreme, a perfect one expounds the Dhamma by the middle way. It is with ignorance as condition that formations come to be, formations as condition, consciousness, and so on, with both arising and cessation. That's from the Nidana Samyutta, Samyutta 12:15, and then it skips over to Samyutta 12:17. If one asserts he makes suffering, if one asserts he who makes suffering feels it, being one existent from the beginning, his suffering is of his own making, then one arrives at eternalism. But if one asserts one makes suffering, another feels it, being one existent crushed out by feeling, his suffering is of another's making, then one arrives at annihilationism. Instead of resorting to either of these extremes, a perfect one expounds the Dhamma by the middle way, dependent origination. And then we have something that comes up in many different suttas. All beings are maintained by nutriment. What is nutriment? There are these four kinds of nutriment for the maintenance of beings that already are, and for the assistance of those seeking renewal of being. They are physical food as nutriment, gross or subtle, contact as the second, volition as the third, and consciousness as the fourth. Next one is from Digha Nikaya 22, the Mahasatipatthana. The very essence of right view is, however, understanding of the Four Noble Truths, which embrace dependent arising and constitute the teaching peculiar to the Buddhas. They formed the subject of the first sermon. What is right view? It is the knowledge of suffering, of the origin of suffering, of the cessation of suffering, and of the way leading to the cessation of suffering. This is called right view. And one from Samyutta Nikaya 35, 197. 4 venomous snakes is a name for the four great elements, earth, water, fire, and air. And then from Samyutta Nikaya 2295, form is like a lump of froth, feelings like a water bubble, perception too is like a mirage, formations, or sankharas, like a plantain trunk, and consciousness, the sun's kinsman shows, seems nothing but a conjuring trick. And now from Samyutta Nikaya 35, 197. The six bases in oneself can be termed an empty village, for whether a wise man investigates them as to the eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, or mind, they appear like hollow, empty, and void. The six external bases can be termed village-raiding robbers, for the eye is harassed among agreeable and disagreeable forms, the ear among such sounds, the nose among such odors, the tongue among such flavors, the body among such tangibles, and the mind among such mental objects. Next one is from Sutta Nipata 4, verse 2. In the world I see this generation racked by craving for being, wretched men gibbering in the face of death, still craving, hoping for some kind of being. See how they tremble over what they claim as mine, like fish in the puddles of a failing stream. And then in Anguttara Nikaya 10, Sutta 60. This is the most peaceful, this is the goal superior to all, that is to say, the stilling of all formations, the relinquishing of all essentials of existence, the exhaustion of craving, cessation, nibbana. And so the way Venerable Ñāṇamoli treats right view, he goes in really into depth in right view for maybe 5 more pages, and then he treats the rest of the Noble Eightfold Path very succinctly. So we'll probably just spend the rest of this session only going into right view and all these 20 or 30 different sutta passages that he has about right view. And I'll just continue saying what each sutta passage is in case anybody makes note of it and wants to look it up in full. The next passage is from Majjhima Nikaya 75. The greatest of worldly gains is health. Nibbana is the greatest bliss. The Eightfold Path is the best of paths to lead in safety to the deathless. And now from Anguttara Nikaya, Book of the Threes, Sutta 47. Again, it is right view of the 3 general characteristics of impermanence, suffering, and not self, which express comprehensively what dependent arising expresses structurally. They were the subject of the second sermon, the Anattalakkhana Sutta. There are 3 formed characteristics of what is formed. Arising is evident, passing away is evident, and alteration of what is present is evident. There are 3 unformed characteristics of what is unformed. No arising is evident, no fall is evident, and no alteration of what is present is evident. So the 3 characteristics of the sankhara, of the conditioned, and 3 characteristics of the unconditioned. So the 3 characteristics of the unconditioned being no arising is evident, no passing away is evident, no alteration of what is present is evident. It's one of these rare times when you get something of a description of the unconditioned. And the next is the next 3 passages are from Samyutta Nikaya chapter 35, and it jumps around a bit. When one understands how form, feeling, perception, formations, and consciousness are impermanent, one therein possesses right view. All is impermanent. And what is the all that is impermanent? The I is impermanent. Forms are impermanent. Eye consciousness, eye contact, whatever is felt as pleasant, painful, or neither pleasant nor painful, born of eye contact, is impermanent. The ear, the nose, the tongue, the body, the mind is impermanent. Mental objects, mind consciousness, mind contact, whatever is felt, born of mind contact, is impermanent. What is impermanent is suffering. What is suffering is not self. Next is from Anguttara Nikaya, Book of the Threes, Sutta 134. Whether perfect ones appear or not, there remains this element, this structure of things, this certainty in things. All formations are impermanent. All formations are dukkha. All things are not self. And from Samyutta Nikaya 22, Sutta 94. Bhikkhus, I do not dispute with the world disputes with me. One who proclaims the Dhamma disputes with no one in the world. What wise men in the world say there is not, that I too say there is not. And what wise men in the world say there is, that I too say there is. Wise men in the world say there is no permanent, everlasting, eternal form which is not subject to change, and I too say that there is none. And so too of the other four aggregates. Wise men in the world say there is no impermanent form. Wise men in the world say that there is impermanent form, which is suffering and subject to change, and I too say that there is, and so on with the other four aggregates. Feeling, perception, mental formations, consciousness. This body is impermanent, it is formed, and it is dependently arisen. Next is from Samyutta Nikaya 12, Sutta 61. It would be better for an untaught, ordinary man to treat as self this body, which is constructed upon the four great elements, than mentality. Why? Because this body can last 1 year, 2 years, 100 years. But what is called mentality and mind and consciousness arises and ceases differently through night and day, just as a monkey ranging through the forest seizes a branch and, letting that go, seizes another. Next is from Anguttara Nikaya, Book of the Nines, Sutta 20. Fruitful as the act of giving is, yet it is still more fruitful to go with confident heart for refuge to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, and undertake the 5 precepts of virtue, Fruitful as that is, yet it is still more fruitful to maintain loving kindness in being for only as long as the milking of a cow. Fruitful as that is, yet it is still more fruitful to maintain perception of impermanence in being only for as long as the snapping of a finger. Next is from Samyutta Nikaya 35, Sutta 19. Whosoever relishes the eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind, relishes suffering, and they will not be freed from suffering, I say. From Anguttara Nikaya, Book of the Sixes, Sutta 63. What is the ripening of suffering? When someone is overcome and his mind is obsessed by suffering, either he sorrows and laments, and beating his breast, he weeps and becomes distraught, or else he undertakes a search externally. Who is there that knows one word, 2 words, for the cessation of suffering? I say that suffering either ripens in confusion or in search. And now from Anguttara Nikaya, Book of the Sixes, Sutta 99. That anyone should see formations as pleasure, or nibbana as suffering, and have a liking that is in conformity with truth, is not possible, but the opposite is possible. Next is from Samyutta Nikaya 22:59. All form, feeling, perception, formations, and consciousness of whatever kind, whether past, future, or present, in oneself or external, coarse or fine, inferior or superior, far or near, should be regarded as it actually is thus. This is not mine. This is not what I am. This is not myself. Next is the next 2 are from Samyutta Nikaya, the next 3 actually, are from Samyutta Nikaya 35, chapter 35. That in the world by which one perceives the world and conceits, that in the world by which one perceives the world and conceits about the world is called the world in the Noble One's discipline. And what is it in the world with which one does that? It is with the eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind. It being worn away, lujjati, that's Lujjati, worn away. It is being worn away. That is why it is called the world, loka. Void world, it is said, Lord. In what way is void world said? It is because of what is void of self and self's property that void world is said, Ananda. And what is void of self and self's property? The eye, forms, eye consciousness, eye contact, any feeling born of eye contact, the ear, the nose, the tongue, the body, the mind, any feeling, whether pleasant, painful, or neither painful nor pleasant, born of mind contact, is void of self and self's property. Next is from Anguttara Nikaya, Book of the Sevens, Sutta 46. When a bhikkhu abides much with his mind fortified by perception of impermanence, his mind retreats, retracts, and recoils from gain, honor, and renown instead of reaching out to it. Just as a rooster's feather or a shred of sinew thrown on a fire retreats, retracts, and recoils from it instead of reaching out to it. When he abides much with his mind fortified by perception of suffering in impermanence, there is established in him vivid perception of concern of laxity, indolence, idleness, fear of laziness, indolence, idleness, negligence, and failure in devotion and reviewing, as of a murderer with poisoned weapon. When he abides much with his mind fortified by perception of not self in suffering, his mind is rid of the conceits that treat in terms of I and mine, this body with its consciousness and all external signs. That's actually a very good sutta to read in full at some point Anguttara Nikaya, Book of the Sevens, Sutta 46. Very practical, applicable. The next one is Majjhima Nikaya 44. The rationalized, he gives a bit of an intro to it. The rationalized self-theory, which is called, in whatever form it may take, both a view and a fetter, is based upon a subtle fundamental distortion in the act of perceiving, the conceit I am, which is a fetter but not a view. Now, self-theories may or may not be actually formulated, but if they are, they cannot be described specifically without reference to the five aggregates. For that reason, they can, when described, all be reduced to one of the types of what is called the Embodiment View, which is set out schematically. These are all given up by the stream enterer, though the conceit I am is not. And then this is from Majjhima Nikaya 44. How does there come to be the Embodiment View? I'm assuming that's Sakaya Ditti. Here the untaught ordinary man, who has no regard for noble ones and is unconversant with their Dhamma and discipline, sees form as self, or self as possessed of form, or form as in self, or self as in form, and so on with each of the other four aggregates, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. A well-taught noble disciple does not do this. Next is from Majjhima Nikaya 2, the Sabbasava Sutta. The untaught ordinary man who has no regard for noble ones gives unreasoned attention in this way. Was I in the past? Was I not in the past? What was I in the past? How was I in the past? Having been what was I in the past? Shall I be in the future? Shall I not be in the future? What shall I be in the future? How shall I be in the future? Having been what shall I be in the future? Or else he wonders about himself now in the presently arisen period in this way. Am I? Am I not? What am I? How am I? Whence has this being come? Whither is it bound? When he gives unreasoned attention in this way, and that's ayoniso manasikara, then one of the six types of view arises in him as true and established. My self exists, or my self does not exist, or I perceive self with self, or I perceive not self with self, or I perceive self with not self, or some such view as, this is myself that speaks and feels and experiences here or there the ripening of good and bad actions, but this myself is permanent, everlasting, not subject to change, and will endure as long as eternity. This field of views is called the thicket of views, the wilderness of views, the contortion of views, the vacillation of views, the fetter of views. The untaught ordinary man, bound by the fetter of views, is not freed from birth, aging, and death, sorrow and lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. He is not freed from suffering, I say. Next one is from Itivuttaka, Sutta 49. Bhikkhus, there are two kinds of wrong view, and when deities and human beings are in their grip, some hang back and some overreach. It is only those with vision that see. How do some hang back? Deities and human beings love being, delight in being, enjoy being. When the Dhamma is expounded to them for the ending of being, their hearts do not go out to it or acquire confidence, steadiness, and decision. So some hang back. And how do some overreach? Some are ashamed, humiliated, and disgusted by that same being, and they look forward to non-being in this way. Sirs, when, with the dissolution of the body, this self is cut off, annihilated, and accordingly, after death no longer is, that is the most peaceful, that is the goal superior to all, that is reality. So some overreach. And how do those with vision see? Here a bhikkhu sees whatever has come to be as come into being. By seeing it thus, he has entered upon the way to dispassion for it, to the fading and ceasing of lust for it. That is how one with vision sees. So that simple coming back to mindfulness. That's Itivutaka 49. That one's very applicable as well, because we're doing that all the time. And the previous one as well. Like for myself, sometimes I take that as a meditation object. Like if the mind is thinking about the future, having that as a mantra, like saying to myself, shall I be in the future? Shall I not be in the future? What shall I be in the future? How shall I be in the future? Having been what shall I be in the future? And then being without a doubt that that's ayoniso manasikara. That's unwise attention. Okay, just a little bit. 3 more pages. Next is from Majjhima Nikaya 22. Bhikkhus, the possession that one might possess that were permanent, everlasting, do you see any such possession? No, Lord. The self-theory clinging whereby one might cling that would never arouse sorrow and despair in him who clung thereby, do you see any such self-theory clinging? No, Lord. The view as support that one might take as support that would never arouse sorrow and despair in him who took it as support, do you see any such view as support? No, Lord. Bhikkhus, there being self, would there be self's property? Yes, Lord. And there being self's property, would there be self? Yes, Lord. Bhikkhus, self and self's property being unapprehendable as true and established, then would not this view, this is the world, this is the self, after death I shall be permanent, everlasting, eternal, not subject to change, I shall endure as long as eternity, be the pure perfection of a fool's idea? How could it not be, Lord? It would be the pure perfection of a fool's idea. Next one is from Samyutta Nikaya 22, Sutta 47. Whenever any monks or Brahmins see self in its various forms, all of them see the 5 aggregates affected by clinging, or one or another of them. Here an untaught ordinary man who disregards noble ones sees form as self, or self as possessed of form, or form as in self, or self as in form, or he does likewise with the other 4 aggregates. So he has this rationalized seeing, and he has also this fundamental attitude, I am. But as long as there is the attitude, I am, there is the organization of the 5 faculties of eye, ear, nose, tongue, and body. Then there is mind, and there are ideas, and there is the element of ignorance. When an untaught, ordinary man is touched by feeling born of the contact of ignorance, it occurs to him, I am, and I am this, and I shall be, and I shall not be, and I shall be with form, and I shall be formless, and I shall be percipient, and I shall be unpercipient, and I shall be neither percipient nor unpercipient. But in the case of the well-taught noble disciple, while the 5 sense faculties remain as they are, his ignorance about them is abandoned and true knowledge arisen. With that, it no more occurs to him, I am, or all of the above, to I shall be neither percipient nor unpercipient. Next two passages are from Samyutta Nikaya 22, Sutta 83 and Sutta 49. The ordinary man is unaware of the subtle fundamental attitude, the underlying tendency or conceit, I am. It makes him, in perceiving a perception, automatically and simultaneously conceive in terms of I, assuming an I relationship to the perception, either as identical with it, or as contained within it, or as separate from it, or as owning it. This attitude, this conceiving, is only given up with the attainment of arhantship, not before. And then this is the sutta. I am is derivative, not underivative. Derivative upon what? Derivative upon form, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. When any monk or Brahmin, with form and the rest as the means, which is impermanent, suffering, and subject to change, sees thus, I am superior, or I am equal, or I am inferior, what is that if not blindness to what actually is? And the next sutta is from Majjhima Nikaya 64. This one is continuing with Samyutta Nikaya 22, and this is Sutta 89. Questioned by elders, the elder Kamaka said, I do not see in these five aggregates affected by clinging any self or self's property, yet I am not an arhat with taints exhausted. On the contrary, I still have the attitude, I am, with respect to these five aggregates affected by clinging, although I do not see I am this with respect to them. I do not say I am form, or I am feeling, or I am perception, or I am mental formations, or I am consciousness, nor do I say I am apart from these things. Yet I still have the attitude I am with respect to the five aggregates affected by clinging, although I do not see I am this with respect to them. Although a noble disciple may have abandoned the five more immediate fetters, still his conceit I am, desire I am, underlying tendency I am, with respect to the five aggregates affected by clinging, remains as yet unabolished. Later he abides contemplating rise and fall thus, such is form, such its origin, such its disappearance, and so on with the other four aggregates, till by so doing his conceit I am eventually comes to be abolished. Lastly, we come to the 10 fetters, which are progressively broken by the 4 stages of realization. And then this is from Majjhima Nikaya 64. An untaught ordinary man who disregards noble ones lives with his heart possessed and enslaved by the embodiment view, Sakkaya Ditthi, by uncertainty, by misapprehension of virtue and duty, by lust for sensuality, by ill will, and he does not see how to escape from them when they arise. These, when they are habitual and remain uneradicated in him, are called the more immediate fetters. So that's the first 5 fetters. That's the Sakkaya Ditthi, or the self-view, coarse self-view, the doubt, and Silabbata Paramasa, the attachment to rites and rituals, and also lust for sensuality and ill will. The 5 more remote fetters are lust for form, lust for the formless, the conceit I am, agitation, and ignorance. And then from Majjhima Nikaya 118, Anapanasati Sutta. There are bhikkhus who, with the exhaustion of the first 3 fetters, have entered the stream, are no more subject to perdition, certain of rightness, and destined to enlightenment. There are bhikkhus who, with the exhaustion of 3 fetters and the attenuation of lust, hate, and delusion, are once returners. Returning once to this world, they will make an end of suffering. There are bhikkhus who, with the destruction of the 5 more immediate fetters, are destined to reappear spontaneously elsewhere and will there attain final nibbana, never returning meanwhile from that world. There are bhikkhus who are arhants with taints exhausted, who have lived out the life, done what was to be done, laid down the burden, reached the highest goal, destroyed the fetters of being, and who are completely liberated through final knowledge. That which is the exhaustion of lust, of hate, and of delusion is called arhantship. And finally, from Samyutta Nikaya 22, Sutta 2. When a bhikkhu travels in many countries, learned people of all stations will ask him questions. Learned and inquiring people will ask, what does the Venerable One's teacher tell? What does he preach? Rightly answering, you can say, our teacher preaches the removal of desire and lust. And if you are then asked, removal of desire and lust for what? You can answer, removal of desire and lust for form, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. And if you are then asked, but what inadequacy or danger do you see in those things? You can answer, when a person is not without lust and desire and love and thirst and fever and craving for these things, then with their change and alteration, sorrow and lamentation, pain, grief, and despair arise in them. And if you are then asked, and what advantage do you see in doing this? You can answer, when a person is free from lust and desire and love and thirst and fever and craving for form, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness, then, with their change and alteration, no sorrow and lamentation, pain, grief, and despair arise for them. So, leave it there for today, and it was kind of a lot, but those are all very good suttas to look into more deeply. We have about 5 minutes if anybody has any questions.
So yesterday we heard a talk from Ajahn Ñāṇiko, and towards the beginning of the talk he said things like, you are consciousness, or your true nature is consciousness. Also said things like, consciousness is permanent. How are we supposed to reconcile that with teaching on right view?
Yeah, there's no real way. This is an ongoing kind of thing, getting into semantics. And essentially, I would say, like, because people got onto Ajahn Mapua's case for the same thing, and essentially it's like teaching from experience, so you really have to go to Ajahn Sumedho and cross-question him, and you really get into that, well, this is what I mean by that. But a lot of it is, it's like getting into semantics, because he's certainly not saying, he's like trust in being the knowing, but he's not categorically saying consciousness is self. I don't think he ever said that. But he's saying like this trust in awareness, trust in being the knowing as a tool for coming back into yourself. That's how I hear it anyway. I don't know if Lumpur has anything to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's more like a teaching device, and it's easy to go on a rational level to take the teachings on impermanence and then end up at a point of which hated it, and this talk again, he's been he's using it as a device, trying to get people to have the trust in themselves, trust in the practice, and not keep deferring to a kind of nihilist stand. And also, I mean, in that same talk, he's also saying, pointing out everything actually is impermanent. He's quite happy to contradict himself. And that, it's similar. I remember one time being visiting Ajahn Buddha. Ajahn Buddhist is quite well known for his kind of emphasis on not bothering with rebirth. I was actually Ajahn Ñāṇiko. He was reading with, and we were going to Malaysia, and he actually asked Ajahn Buddha, here that you teach that there is no rebirth, there is no other worlds, and Ajahn Buddhadasa's replies, well, what did the Buddhas teach? And Ajahn Ñāṇiko says, well, the Buddha taught that the word, and part of right view is there is process, there is other worlds. And Ajahn Buddha, I wouldn't contradict the Buddha. So there's a lot of it is emphasis or something, follow the Buddha teachings. So that is, so much of it is teaching devices and trying to get people. And that middle way is it's not tangible. It's not a thing. It's not solid. And it's to be, it's subtle, and to be seen for each one's person for themselves. So it's like trying to get that balance. And the mind just rebels and give me something solid. And tell me what the truth is. But it's the sense of what is it that allows one to actually let go? What is it that one to turn toward dispassion? And dispassion is oftentimes, well, if I'm negative enough, then I've got dispassion. But it's